Shiatiki chumon molokiwash. Shiatiki chumon molokiwash. Shiatiki chumon molokiwash. Shiatiki chumon molokiwash. Kepakaki ahashil kuku. Pakaki ahashil kuku.
Hello, and welcome to Reclaiming Our Stories, Voices of Indigenous Peoples of California. I'm your story weaver, Victorio L. Shaw, a citizen of the Hoopa Valley Tribe and chief judge for the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians and the Robinson Rancheria Tribal Courts. In this podcast, we sit down with Indigenous leaders, artists, historians, and community voices to share stories rooted in land, culture, and lived experience. These conversations invite us to listen more deeply to the histories, perspectives, and knowledge that continue to shape California today. Thank you for joining us. In today's episode, we're joined by Georgiana Sanchez of the coastal Chumash, Tohono O'odham, and Akimel O'odham people, and the Honorable Abby Abinanti of the Yurok tribe for a conversation titled Whose 250 Years?
Haku, haku. Haku ich antik. Haku kikich. Kapti luhui hismuch. Kapti Georgiana hi English. Kapap anish ulbolok. Swahili hilimu hinakalamu. Miku Shukston. Tohono O'odham, Mahoni, Tohono O'odham, Akimel O'odham.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. Welcome to Reclaiming Our Stories, Georgiana. How are you?
I'm good, and it's so good to meet you and to know that we know people together. I just love that our communities are coming together. I'm just so happy about that.
Absolutely. It's an honor to meet you. I'm very impressed by your body of work. So just a few things to mention. You were a professor of American Indian Studies at Cal State Long Beach for 27 years. You are a wonderful storyteller and a member of the California Indian Storytelling Association. And you, in fact, have a collection of poems that you've written entitled A Light to Do Shell Work By, which was released in just a few years ago. And you have some very wonderful poems, and hopefully, if we're lucky, maybe you'll share one with us later. Our show today is entitled Whose 250 Years? As the United States is set to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, can you tell us what comes to mind when you hear that as it relates to your people and their stories?
Because you're talking about their independence. And it's almost as though we're just these unseen people. My father went to the third grade, but he was a brilliant man, my Chumash father. And our lineage goes back to the islands. That's what I was telling you in our language. And he used to say that there was a collective unconscious guilt, he said, in the United States and Canada and places probably all through the Americas that seemed to negate the existence of Native peoples. It's almost like if you are going to address the fact that this is our land and that we were here for thousands of years and that we are still here, it sort of messes up their story about that this is about their independence and their freedoms and their rights and all that. It's like and we're still struggling to undo or reclaim a lot of what was really brutally taken out of us, which is our language, our ceremonies. My father's people will never get their land back in Southern California. It is some of the most expensive real estate in Southern California. All you have to do is think about it, it's just Malibu. We'll never get it back. But the thing is, my dad would say, when I would take him up to the meetings with the Chumash people up north in Santa Barbara, he kind of chuckled to himself in the car. And I'd look at him, waiting for him to say it. He'd say, they think they own the land. And then he'd chuckle again. Dad hardly ever laughed out loud, but he'd chuckle once in a while. And so that sort of what you are reading about this celebration of the independence, it makes me, you should hear some of us sometimes. It's, gosh, I don't even know what to say. It's ludicrous to us. It's just ludicrous to us. Anyway, I probably said too much, but it's like we'll never get our land back. But Daddy, on the other hand, would say they think they own the land. So he's telling me our land is still there. And I'm very lucky to have been born and raised in Southern California because I have that connection still. I know where my ancestors came from on the Chumash side. I don't know what else to think. There's always this separation in Native peoples, I think, between what the United States stands for or says it is about and our reality, our historical reality, some of the most horrible things that could happen to a people. Everything that after World War II, that they went and decided what is genocide. At the time, they were thinking about what happened to the Jews, and rightly so. But we fit here in California, particularly. I know in other states too, with a lot of things, but here in California, particularly, and just reading that stuff again about what happened to us, because there's a deep sorrow we carry within us. And
yes,
so we have to look at it. We have to. It affects us in so many ways, negative ways too, but still knowing about it in a way kind of frees us. It's not some unnamed dark thing that's out there. It's something that really happened.
Yeah, I really felt that when you said that we carry a sorrow with us.
Yes.
And I think I felt that the heaviness that I carry around, and it's always been with me. And I think that you really nailed what it is. And it is a sorrow that it's a wound that really hasn't been healed. I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit about the importance of knowing who you are and where you came from and how that was passed down to you and how it survived really these multiple iterations of colonization and genocide.
I'm so lucky to have been raised by my mom and dad. Daddy, this amazing Chumash man, was born in 1897, and he walked up and down California. He knew it. And a lot of times the only map he had was the stories his father would tell him. If you go a mile south, you say, and the mountains are to your left, there'll be this tree there. And Dad would follow those kinds of directions. So the map was a story that his father would tell. And so we heard a lot of that. We were the last people ever to get a television. I think I was already heading into my teens because Dad didn't want us to have a television set, because he said that would take away from the storytelling time, from the time where we learn our history, from the time where we got together as a family and talked and laughed and, those kinds of things that I feel so bad for our young people today. Also, we lived sort of like many Native peoples and all over, but in California, there was a diaspora of people who either went working for the someplace else. For those of us who didn't have a reservation anymore, I was 12 when my dad's people were terminated. Tell you a little bit about that now. We always lived in poor little homes, little old houses there that we would be willing to rent. Because sometimes I grew up at a time when they would say no Indians or dogs allowed, no Mexicans or dogs allowed, things like that. So we were always the other and not very welcome. And we lived in one of my favorite stories I'm writing. It's in my novel that I'm working on. We lived in a Japanese schoolhouse. And Daddy had fixed it up so that we had a bedroom that we shared with Mom and Dad and my sister. And then we had the kitchen that Daddy fixed up, which must have been the porch before. And then there was this big room where the students must have gone. And we used to call it the playroom. But then I asked, where had all the children gone? This was during World War II. And a lot of the Japanese had been sent to internment camps. So, you were surrounded by this, I was going to say unfairness, but that's not a big enough word. It's like, and through it all, I think Mom and Dad tried to protect us in a way, keep us looking, number one, looking at the land. My most favorite times was going through the hay fields and lying down underneath a tree and seeing the clouds drifting over. And it felt like you were part of the rotation of the earth, the way that feels when you're under the tree and the tree is this focal point, but the clouds are moving and it feels like the world is moving. We had the time when we were kids to do that. So I'm so grateful. And Dad was an herbalist. And when Mama was working at the Morongo Reservation, he was the herbalist. He had these jars of all these plants that he would pick. And sometimes we'd have to stop the car. Oh, wait a minute. There's, then he'd get out and go by the mountain and grab these things. It's funny. You kind of live in those days, we only lived in one world. Going to school was another matter. That's when you knew that somehow you were different. You didn't know till you went to school sometimes. And even though I could probably fit in, I'm the fairest of my family. I don't like that, but that's what happened. And thank God all my kids are these beautiful brown children. So, it's like school, they told stories that didn't match with what my parents told us. It was often a difficult time. And I remember a lot of times as young as I was in first or second grade, I would want to go to school. So I would sit on somebody's porch until the school let out because I just was so uncomfortable in that classroom.
I can relate to that. We're hearing this emphasis on storytelling that really was inherent to Indigenous people. And there's this counter stories that are told to us through school, through television, to us as American people. What do you think is the story that needs to be told about your people?
Well, I went back to school. I had 5 children, a city college, and then went on to Cal State Long Beach and went through the American Indian Studies department. One of the reasons I just was driven to do that with 5 kids and all the work that it takes studying, is because I wanted to be, I remember saying this in my head, a voice for the voiceless. Because wherever I went, like especially in our schools, we are an invisible people. We are just invisible. Nobody knows about the history of what happened in California. And my students at the university would say, how come we were never taught this, at least in high school, they'd say. And they'd get angry about that. And I would tell them, especially when I was teaching California Indian history, this is your home. This is where you are. You need to know these things so you can have a good, honest picture about, California. And I love this state. I love it. I mean, as I read more and I sorrow more for the people who were massacred. I mean, from north to south, Kathy Sobel, who was an amazing woman with the Cahuilla people, just dear friend of my mom and dad's. And Mama worked at for the food for the elderly on Morongo Reservation. And so it feels like we have a lot of cousins there. But there was a point I was making. God, oh my God, I'm getting to be old.
You're talking about, why you wanted to go to college.
Right. To be a
professor.
Voice for the voiceless. Yeah.
Correct.
I did. And then I remember and that meant I was going to be writing. And I've had things published since the 80s, but I don't know what. I don't know if I didn't believe enough that it was good enough or whatever, but I never had a collection of anything. I was always part of anthologies, and I knew a lot of other writers, but my own collection, no. And so I was 80 years old when I said, oh, heck, and it's really a memoir of my family in poetry form. Yeah.
Beautiful. I think there's a lot of Californians, have visited the southern coast of California, the beautiful shores where your people are from. And I think that you're right that the Indians are invisible to most people, especially I think in Southern California in a lot of ways. Compared to where I'm from, is we're kind of like the only minority, so we're more visible. What can you tell people about the coast of Southern California from the Chumash perspective?
It's just beautiful. The land, the ocean, the people, and you can see right away on the maps that Baja California and California were connected. There is an artificial barrier there. Same as with my mother's people in Arizona, where especially the Tohonacan side, they butt right up into Mexico. And there's that border is just a man-made line on the map. It's, so, what was the question again?
Well, I was just wondering if you could maybe give some of your perspective or story on the coast of California and just maybe what you think of when you think of that land.
Well, and we would know when the whales were migrating south. And then sometimes that they were to go, I don't know if the babies were born north and they were going south to feed them. So we would go and stand on the bluffs and watch these whales. And you could see them out there because of the spouts. And every once in a while, if you were lucky, they would breach. They would come up. And so that land and that connection with the ocean, very important to us. When the Spaniards came up at first just to look at California, they saw our people, the Chumash people, had what they called hundreds of boats, they said, are sewn plank canoes that the Spaniards were so impressed with. And we still have them. And in the 70s, began to rebuild our tomo. Now I believe we have 4 tomos and make a yearly trek to Swahili, where our people originated from, especially Daddy. And we go, so if I'm driving up the coast and I'm looking at the ocean, we always get excited when we get closer to Santa Barbara because there's the islands out there. The islands of our origin are there. And everything is alive. I don't know how to explain it. Like even when Daddy said, oh, they think they own the land, we'd be passing, all these homes and stuff. But it's alive with memory. It is alive because of the beauty of it. We've been by the ocean when it was just raging. My father had such respect for the ocean, and he taught all of us. I started calling the ocean our grandmother, the grandmother ocean. So it's, God, I don't even know, I have the words to tell you about the land. And the thing too is, there's a section in my poetry book, I'm not going to read it, where Mom and Dad would take us. I remember one time just being alone with them, would take us into the desert to see when the flowers were in bloom. So there's this connection to California because we also have desert. When I was a kid, the mountains were just so beautiful. But the ocean was like, the sound of it was like our grandmother lullaby or something, But other times it was raging. Huge waves would be coming. And Dad loved that kind of stuff. He'd want to take us out to go see it or hear it because we always lived pretty close to the ocean. We go clam digging. We have food. Go fishing off the pier or off the ocean. So, that was like, you're so grateful for the land and the ocean. And all the stories that were connected to it. It's not just land and an ocean. It's more than that. And like I said, here I am a writer, and I can't find the words to tell you how the ineffable beauty and wisdom and what it's trying to tell us about ourselves and our connection to creation. It's just almost too big for words to kind of capture, especially words in English.
Right.
You can objectify stuff in English. You can't objectify anything in our native language. You're related to everything. An arm belongs to somebody. It's not just an arm.
Yeah. Well, I think you did a great job of describing your relationship and your people's relationship with the land. I feel like I could talk to you forever, Georgiana, but I wanted to ask you this last question before I asked you to bless us with a poem, if you would. What do you feel called to unearth, remember, or make right in terms of history?
The novel that I've been working on for like 6 years, the working title right now is House of Bones. And it has to do with all of our remains that had been unearthed. Every time, people would have to go because they would find the remains of our ancestors. And so we, especially the coastal band, were some of the first to begin to receive our remains and then sometimes have to rebury them. But usually we would say, don't move them. Leave them there, that they're safe there, but they had to dig them up and study them and all of that. It was such lack of respect for our dead. So it's kind of dark in that way, but it's also, there's a lot of light in there. Anyway, this is called Chumash, man. And it's for my dad. This was short. Chumash, he says. And when he says it, I think of ancient sea lion hunts and salt spray, wind swept across my face. They tell him his people are dead, terminated. It's official. U.S. rubber-stamped official. Chumash terminated. A people who died, they say. A case for anthropologists. But this old one whose face his ancient prayers come to rest. This old one knows who he is. Chumash, he says, and somewhere sea lions still gather along the California coast, and salt spray rises, rainbow mist, above the constant breaking of the waves.
Oh.
And
beautiful.
I was 12 or 13 when my dad's people were terminated. And Mama said, oh, Johnny. She says, the Tonga were also terminated at that time. That means our federal status was taken away. So the United States government had just don't have to deal with us anymore. Dad says, I don't want, because they were given money, something like 47 cents an acre or something like that. Horrible, And so anyway, Dad didn't want any money from them. But Mother said, oh, you should look into this. Maybe you'd have some, No, Dad says no. I remember that so distinctly.
Thank you so much, Georgiana.
I'm so happy to be with you. So happy to be one of many voices out there that are doing such amazing work. I wish I was still traveling around so I could meet him again, but I'm getting older by the minute.
Well, it was an honor to meet you. Thank you for blessing us with your time and your words. And good luck with your next book.
Yes.
And your poetry is just simply beautiful. Thank you so much.
Victorio.
Thank you.
This is about the day that my dad died, and the title of the book, A Light to Do Shell Work By, for my father, Joseph John Moreno, June 5th, 1897 to August 15, 1991. One day, all of life catapulted into one day, one moment of sunlight, filtering through a high bedroom window, framed by blue curtains, filtering through the waiting of the grown-ups. Sunlight and the laughter of children outside, warming my father's dying. My father turns his head to acknowledge the sun. The light, he says, and the light within. It's a good light to do shell work by. The ocean sang in my father's hands. Abalone pendants shimmered rainbows from the ears of pretty girls, and shell work dotted driftwood carvings, cowrie shells, cone shells, volute shells, red, black, white, blue, brown, green shells. The life they once held, sacred. Old stories etched on the lifeline of my father's palm. I hold my father's hand, my own shell work words, my poet's eye noting the light, how through the bedroom door the ears of fresh white corn piled on the kitchen table harvest the afternoon sun. How light shines through a glass of water, touches my mother's white hair as she leans to embrace my father. The hush of twilight, and how the sunset, like a trail of wild lupins or the tracings on seashells, tells stories of our origin as it lights up the sky with fire.
Reclaiming Our Stories podcast is made possible with support from the 11th Hour Project, the Weingart Foundation, and By the People Conversations Beyond 250, a nationwide initiative led by the Federation of State Humanities Councils in partnership with the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. We also thank the Autry Museum of the American West for partnering with us in hosting our live podcast event. Together, these partners help make it possible to share stories that deepen understanding of the many cultures and histories that shape California.
Let me welcome our second guest, Judge Abby Abinanti, the Yurok Chief Judge and former San Francisco Commissioner. Judge Abby, as she is known widely and popularly, was the first California Native woman to be admitted into the California State Bar Association. I have the honor of knowing her for many years. I consider her one of my personal heroes and mentors, and it is my great honor to welcome Judge Abby to Reclaiming Our Stories. Hi, Judge Abby. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And it's always good to be with you, as you know.
Likewise. I wouldn't be where I am today without you. And so you're always in my heart and my mind when I do the work that I do, and I owe so much to you for paving the way. So it's great to see you again. Today's episode, we are focusing on the question of whose 250 years. And that refers to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which happened 250 years ago. As the United States is set to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Can you tell us your perspective on what comes to mind when you hear that as it relates to your people and their stories?
Well, I don't think of it as occasion for a party, I'll say that. I think that when you look at it, you have to realize for them, they have a whole different worldview than we have. We were somewhat more fortunate than our relatives from the East Coast because it took them longer to get out here, frankly. And that's in many ways to our advantage as we try to regroup and go forward. And my concern now with them and their behavior is it's only been, for us, it's the gold rush that caused the major problems and the major invasion here. And until that point, we had pretty much held off the disaster. But after that point and the invasion, they came and they brought a lot of discord and disharmony, and they hurt a lot of things. I mean, we survived up here, these tribes, by basically running and hiding. This place saved us, and there was no gold. And those two things saved us. And now what that's taught us is, in our relationship with our place, is we have a responsibility because now, really, for us here, it's less than 200 years, and they have frankly almost wrecked the joint. And we need to come back out from our hiding and say, look, this is how you live in this place. We need to teach them, because if they don't learn, this time there's no running and hiding for anybody, because they are very destructive. Who knows whether they mean it or don't mean it, but they're extractors. They take, and they do not take care, and they do not have any sense of reciprocal responsibility among the people, place, and the things that live here. We all are together, and we must be together, and we must be responsible to each other. And that's a concept that they may have had at some time, but don't now. And it's on us to remind them, because I think they did have it somewhere. When they say, oh, well, this is a big melting pot, that was a huge mistake, because they made people forget their culture. And in that forgetting, everybody's getting tortured. And we need for them to remember, you can't act like that.
Yes, I think that's very important. And as a Native person, I believe that's one of the main reasons we survived the genocide, is that we have an important lesson to teach the colonizers in this country and just everyone who lives on this land what it means to take care of the land and what it means to take care of each other. So speaking of that truth and those lessons that we have and we carry forward, how were those truths passed on to you from your elders? Because I know it wasn't easy to preserve and pass down this knowledge.
I think it's really how they act toward you and what you see. I mean, when I was doing my first year of law school, I had to go to the hospital because I felt horrible. And finally, I realized I needed help. I went to the clinic at school, and they put me in the hospital. And what it turned out was that I was starving. I didn't have any money. I didn't want to ask my parents, who didn't have money either. And so I just ate less and less and less. And apparently what happened was I was starving to death. So I had malnutrition. And it was, as I was in the hospital, people would come through and look at me because they had never seen it. So it was like a big festival for them to see a starving person and all the symptoms. And finally, one day, a nurse walked in and said, "Where are you from?" Which is our way of going, "What tribe are you?" I told her, and she walked out. And 15 minutes later, the head of the Indian program at the main campus walked in, who you know, Dave Risling, and said the same thing. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" And I told him, and he just shook his head, and he said, "I'm going to give you this address. Do you know where this is?" I said, "No, sir, I don't know where it is." He said, "It's a block and a half from your house." I said, "Can you get me out of here?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll get you out of here. And every night you will go over to my niece's house and have dinner. Do you understand me?" And he was clearly annoyed with me. He said, "Why didn't you come and see me?" I said, "Because I'd never been away from home and I didn't know where you were. I only knew how to get to my house and to the law school." And you could just see him rolling his eyes. and that was the end of my starving to death. And I ate over there for the rest of the year. And that's an important lesson. I mean, he was the head of a program. It wasn't his job to feed kids off the street, but he did it in, less than a half hour and made sure that it happened and that I was taken care of. And that's how it works. And that's how I learned the lessons, really, as people took me in, people showed me, people did that kind of thing, and you learn from that behavior, and okay, he would no more have let me starve than he would have jumped in a spaceship. It just wasn't who he was.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience becoming the first woman attorney in California, coming from such a remote part of the state to the Sacramento area, not knowing anyone, what that journey was like for you?
I was a horrible student most of my life because essentially the schools were very racist at that point, and I was always picked on and bullied and whatever in school. So I stayed home a lot. I didn't go to school a lot. But I had occasional teachers who made all the difference, who helped me, who saw to me, who said, no, you're going to do this. When I graduated from high school, it was during the time that they had just built Humboldt. And they said, every kid who graduates will be admitted. And so this teacher who had been working with me after they took me out of special ed made up this scholarship and gave me a scholarship to go to college, which I didn't realize for years later that it was made up. He and his wife funded it. And so I went to the university, and as I'm getting ready to graduate from the university, and as you know, I don't know what I was thinking of at the time, but 3 old ladies invited me to coffee, and they're up to something. You just don't know what. And so I go to coffee, and then they start this discussion about, wouldn't it be nice to go to law school? And I'm like, no, why would I want to do that? And finally, they just got tired of it and said, look, there's a scholarship. It's a full scholarship, and you can go, and it's a pre-law program. I don't want to go. Yes, you're going. You're the only one graduating. We need a lawyer more than we need whatever you're going to do. It wasn't like I had a big career plan. And I said, and the pre-law program was in New Mexico. And I'm like, I don't even know where New Mexico is. And they said, get a map. It's not that hard. And so it wasn't like a lot of planning. And I will say this, I did something that wasn't very nice at that point. I made one of them promise that one of the trip boys, because it was their mom, was one of the gang. I said, one of them has to go to law school too then. It's not going to be just me. And I have to say, Amos never did forgive me. Because he had to go too. That was my revenge. But it was like, it wasn't very kind of me, but I was like, I don't want to be the only one. I don't know why you're picking on me.
I can relate to that, having a sort of a responsibility that was outside of me or bigger than me in a sense to fulfill that role because it needed to be filled. What are the responsibilities that come with carrying on our history and our traditions and, being a mentor and fulfilling these roles? What are some of the responsibilities that you can touch on and that maybe younger people who feel these same responsibilities, some advice you could give them?
I mean, I think, when at that time was the first time the dances were coming back, and to be part of those and to be involved in those and to be included was really important to me. And those people invited me to those things and to reconnect and to understand who I was. And part of what we do here, even at the tribe in the court, is realize, okay, I went to law school. And as I said, I wasn't a great student. I learned enough to be admitted to the bar, but I also learned this is never going to work. It doesn't work in our environment. So we have set up a court system here that is basically created to look like and respond like an extended family. You have a problem, come and we're going to help you. How are we going to help you? And at first people were like, oh, you can't do this because you know all these people. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not so old. I forgot everybody I grew up with. What are you trying to say? And they said, well, you can't do this because you know these people. I said, look, you guys watch entirely too much TV. They like stranger justice and they can do whatever they want. We never had stranger justice. I said, we're Yuroks here, because I was talking to Yuroks. And I said, and how often do Yuroks get in disputes? I said, that would be like every other day. Do you think we ran up and down the river looking for a stranger to help us resolve it? No, because there weren't any. So how did we resolve it? We sat and talked it out. And that's what we're going to do. And it's not my responsibility to prove what you did or what you didn't do. You know what you did, what you didn't do. Tell me and we'll try to fix it. We have very few trials because people would rather just do that. And we do it and we talk it out. And we go, what do you need so that you can be responsible, so you can do what you need to do for your family? I know you have children. I know you have a mother who needs help. What are we going to do to help you make sure you do that? And so that's a lot of how it works, is very individualized. And it's really basically operates like an extended family. Oh, you need this. So here's this advocate's going to help you clean up your record. This advocate's going to help you fill out job applications. This advocate's going to help you do this or that. I think you would be much better if we got you into treatment and we paid for it for 90 days. What do you think? Yeah, okay. And it's things like that. It's not like, here's a list, go do it. It's like, how are we going to do it with you? How are we going to walk with you to do this? It's just like when Dave came over and said, here, you need to eat. He didn't say eat. He said, this is how you're going to do it. And this is how you're going to get there. Here's the map. He had to draw me a map because I didn't even know where a block and a half from the house was. So he did it. And then he checked to make sure I showed up. And you could tell I knew he was going to check. So I was there,
So I'm very curious about your time as a commissioner, which is a type of judicial officer. So essentially a judge working in San Francisco. How did you get there? And ultimately, how did that experience color what you do in the Yurok tribal court?
Well, I was asked to apply for a commissioner position because at that point I had been representing Native families on Indian Child Welfare Act matters in San Francisco. I had been taking the court appointments for that. And so they were familiar with me and with me as a lawyer. And so they asked me to apply, and I did. And I was assigned primarily between the delinquency and the dependency courts. In San Francisco, the family law division has family law plus those two court systems. And a lot of it taught me how to behave. It also taught me what my limits were in terms of, we had a situation where we had a security training. And the security training was what to do if there's a situation in your courtroom and the bailiff is in there to protect you, the judge, and get you out of there. And this is how you respond. And I had missed it with the group because I had gone to something, I don't know what. And so I was doing the video of it. And afterwards I went and told my boss, the supervising judge, I completed it, but I have to tell you, I will never leave the courtroom first. And he said, what do you mean? That's what you're supposed to do. I said, well, where I'm from, the most responsible person would leave last. And if I left first, I'd be too ashamed to go anywhere. I said, I won't. And so we got in this big discussion back and forth. And he finally just said, let's just hope it doesn't happen in your courtroom. I said, I can live with that, and turned and walked out. There were several of those kinds of things. Another time when I gave a baby to him, I think I was the first person on that bench to give a baby to a father. It was a girl, as opposed to a mother or to an aunt or whatever. And they were having a fit. They said, you can't do that. I said, the law says I can do it, and I am doing it. And the guy had come in. He was very responsible. He had a job, and his wife had gotten horribly ill in terms of being a drug addict. And she wouldn't respond. She wouldn't go to treatment. And I said, look, man, I hate to do this to you, but I have to tell you, you're going to choose. You choose your woman, you choose your baby. I said, and it's your choice. You have to make the choice. And I said, and it's not fair, and I'm really sorry. I said, but I'm going to give you a week to think about it, and you come back and tell me what you're going to do. He said, I don't know how to raise a baby. She's a girl. I said, I'm aware she's a girl. I said, do you have sisters? He said, yeah, I have sisters. I said, well, that's why you guys come with them. I said, come back here in a week and tell me what you're going to do. He came back in a week with his sisters. They had it all planned out. I mean, this kid got into preschool, they had introduced him to the other mothers that lived in his apartment building. I mean, it was like all figured out. So at the end of 90 days, I kept him for 90 days. I said, because I have to make sure this is going to work. And I said, if your wife comes back, you tell me and I'll help her. She eventually didn't make it at all. But, and then it came time to dismiss it. And his sisters were there with him again. And I said, okay, I'm going to dismiss this now. I said, I only have one remaining concern. And he's like, oh my God, what? And I said, well, I hate to be the guy who tries to take this girl out on our first date. I hope the three of you have a really nice time. Because I can tell a princess in the making. And his sisters busted out laughing. He looked at me like, what? They all knew what I was saying because this girl, she went from like a grubby little baby to he had everything for her. He did everything. And I said, okay, this girl's going to be a princess. I know what's happening here. So there were times like that, or you have to do this order. No, I don't. In delinquency, they had an 11-year-old kid. He was just a scrawny little kid. Got arrested on a Thursday night. They held him all weekend in detention for a fight in a schoolyard and charged him with a felony. And I called the DA and the public defender up to the bench. And I said, what are you guys doing? This was like on Monday when I was doing the detention hearing. And they said, well, this was serious. And I said, I beg your pardon. I said, let me just tell you, in my court, nobody is going to get charged with a felony if they're not tall enough to get on the teacup rides in Disneyland and don't have a weapon. They said, well, you can't do that. I said, watch me. Step back. So I said to the young defendant, who was a scrawny little kid, I said, stand up, sir. And he did. I said, now turn around and look your mother in the eye. She's the woman in the back seat crying because of what you did. And in the front row is your dad and all your uncles. They did not spend the weekend in jail because they obviously are smarter than you. So the next time you have a bright idea, go to the principal's office and call one of them because they know how to behave and they didn't spend the weekend where you spent the weekend. And I said, I'm going to give you 90 days and you better not show up here again because if you do, I can promise you regret this every day the rest of your life. And that was the end of it. And the lawyers are like, well, you can't do that. I said, well, it's done. I said, that's why God created appellate courts. Have a good day. So there would be things like that where I was just different. But we did a lot of things. I was on top of all the cases. And so I was a judge that they appreciated because we did follow through on things. And we were very involved. I knew how to do it. The calendars were managed well. But sometimes that system doesn't have any humanity in it. There'd be cases like that where you just go, get a grip.
Yeah.
I'm going to make this kid into a criminal? I don't think so. I read him off good, and we never saw him again. Because it was clear to me he had family. And when you have that kind of family, everybody taking off work, everybody there, they're going to handle this. They don't need me.
Yeah, I like that you weaved your native influences into the Western court.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're getting close to the end here, and I want to ask you this last question. Going back to the 250-year anniversary, history is made of stories. Americans are taught many stories growing up. I'm sure you were subjected to many of those stories, as was I. What truths have been buried beneath those stories that we were taught? And what, if anything, do you feel called to unearth from beneath those stories in order to pass on, remember, or make right?
I think the most important thing we can say to them, look, is you learned this story, but that was a lie in this context. And also, in the context of your life, you learned to turn on your own ancestors. And that's a lie, because you have a lot to offer from what they gave you. And now that they've named it genetic memory, and any 3-year-old Yurok could tell you that. But now that their science has proved it, that you have it, they're all for it. Well, everybody has always had it. And I think they need to go back to that, and they need to look at us, and we need to look at them and go back to a time when it's how you act that counts. You do not do this to your neighbor. You do not act like this. You do not tell lies about them. You do not forget who they are. You do not forget that but for us keeping you from starving, you wouldn't have made it. All those things that they don't know. And I think they have to know, and they forget. And it's part of us unlearning our trauma, and they have to unlearn their trauma. Because a lot of them part of the melting pot thing too, is they forgot the trauma they went through. So they don't know where they learned these rotten habits. So it's really hard to unlearn, for humans particularly, why is really important. And we need to help them discover their whys so they can unlearn that and behave like they should. Because if they don't, then all the relatives, not just the humans, all the other beings in this place will be destroyed because they don't think about it. But before, when they were in the countries they came from, I guarantee you they had to think about it or they wouldn't have survived. That's a lot of it. And then when they got to the place where they started having people with more money and less money, that's what led to this sort of behavior. Money became so important, and that status became so important. And I think it needs to be unlearned. And you have to look at your values, because your practices come from your values. And that's where we really got tangled up in this country.
Well put. Judge Abby, it's been a pleasure to talk to you and to see you again, as always. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Okay.
And I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
In parting, I'd like to leave you with a question based on today's episode. What truths have been buried beneath the stories we were taught? And what do you feel called to unearth, remember, or make right? Before we wrap up, we want to invite you to something special. On Saturday, June 27th, Reclaiming Our Stories will be recorded live at the Autry Museum of the American West in Los Angeles. This live event will bring together voices from the podcast for an evening of conversation, storytelling, and reflection on Indigenous histories, cultures, and futures. If you'd like to experience the conversation in person, we hope you'll join us. You can learn more and reserve your spot at calhum.org. Special thanks to our guests, Georgiana Sanchez and Judge Abby Abinanti, for joining us today. You've been listening to Reclaiming Our Stories, Voices of Indigenous Peoples of California, created by California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. To learn more about this podcast and the work of California Humanities, visit calhum.org. Until next time, keep listening, because every story connects us to land, community, and to one another.
Reclaiming Our Stories podcast is made possible with support from the 11th Hour Project, the Weingart Foundation, and By the People Conversations Beyond 250, a nationwide initiative led by the Federation of State Humanities Councils in partnership with the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. We also thank the Autry Museum of the American West for partnering with us in hosting our live podcast event. Together, these partners help make it possible to share stories that deepen understanding of the many cultures and histories that shape California.